I move.
Deputy, you have 20. Is that agreed? The motion is agreed. You have 20 minutes, Deputy.
I'm sharing with my colleagues, Concordia. And I'm glad that I can introduce the Judicial Council Amendment Bill, second stage, to the House. And for far too long, you will have heard me talk about how consumers have been ripped off by insurance industry that has put its customers at the bottom of the list in terms of priorities. And insurance is an essential part of a functioning economy. In many instances, it's a legal requirement. While consumers have no choice but to pay for insurance, the industry has a choice as to how it treats its consumers. And for far too long, it's treated its consumers badly. And that's the reality. An investigation by the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission has found that some of the biggest players in the industry, AIG, Allianz, AXA, Aviva and FBD, engaged in price-fixing, cartel-like activity and behaviour for a 21-month period between 2015 and 2016. In doing so, they reduced competition and increased prices for their customers. Only last December, the Central Bank confirmed that the industry was engaged in dual pricing, a price gouging activity that targets loyal and vulnerable customers and then hits them with artificially high premiums whenever they renew. Sinn Féin has legislation that would ban this practice, as the FCA has done so in Britain. And I would ask the Government to end the delay they placed on that legislation so that the Dáil can end this discriminatory practice at the earliest opportunities. When it comes to prices, the average motor insurance premium has risen by 35% over the past decade, despite the cost of claims reducing over the same period by 9%. And despite all of this, the insurance industry has received a listening ear in government to air their grievances and has regurgitated many of them which were false. This Dáil has responded to one such grievance and delivered for them. The Judicial Council Act was passed by the Dáil in 2019 and ultimately led to the Personal Injuries Guidelines, which came into effect on the 24th of April of this year. These new guidelines reduce the level of damages for personal injury awards from between 38% and up to 69%, but the average being 50% across the board, cutting the cost of claims for the insurance industry and guaranteeing them significant savings as a result. Sinn Féin, as you know, Concordia supported these guidelines for one reason and one reason only: that they would reduce the cost of claims and in doing so reduce the cost of insurance for customers. The insurance industry made a promise. They promised to pass on these savings onto their customers in the form of reduced premiums. They even told us how much we should expect premiums to reduce. Coming before the Finance Committee in 2019, the CEO of Zurich Insurance said that if there was a 50% drop in awards for soft tissue personal injuries, and I quote, he said, "It would be quite reasonable that if that were to happen and insurers hadn't reduced their prices, with all things being equal and somewhere in the region of 10 to 15%, the committee should be asking a lot of questions. For business insurance, he said, we should expect prices to fall by 20%. Now, they're his figures. Maybe we should expect more. But that was straight from the horse's mouth. These guidelines provided for these type of reductions. What we need now to see is the immediate and significant reductions in the insurance premiums paid by customers, by motorists, by businesses, by homeowners, and that is clearly not happening. In a survey that was conducted by my party, in which we received over 1,300 responses, of those who received a renewal quote since the new guidelines came into effect, 58% saw their premium increase despite making no claims in the previous 12 months, with only 22% seeing a reduction in their premiums. With these new guidelines in place, every customer who hasn't made a claim should have seen their premium fall. The government strategy has been to cross its fingers and hope that the industry will do the right thing to cut premiums in response to these guidelines. But I say we can do a lot better than that. We need a measure that will provide oversight, that will hold the industry to account, and that is precisely what this legislation does. It requires insurance companies to provide information to the Central Bank each year for the next 4 years, including the amount paid by the insurance company in personal injuries claim, the amount that would have been paid by the insurance company in personal injuries claim had the personal injuries guideline not come into effect. They have to tell the central bank the average premium charged under policies covering third-party personal injuries and the average premium that would have been charged had the personal injury guidelines not come into effect. The central bank would then be required to submit a report outlining this information to the Minister for Finance on an annual basis, with a copy laid before both houses of the Oireachtas. These reports will show everyone just how much the insurance industry has saved as a result of the personal injury guidelines, and crucially, it will show if they have passed on all of these savings, euro for euro, onto their customers. If they haven't, we will know about it, and so will their customers. Not only will this hold the industry to account, it will apply pressure on them to cut premiums immediately and significantly. After reforms reduced whiplash awards in Britain, similar regulations to this bill were introduced there, coming into effect in March last year. Now listen to this. Some of the biggest players in the Irish market, RSA, Aviva, AXA, Zurich, Allianz, AIG, are also the biggest players in Britain, and they are subject to these requirements that are in my legislation tonight. We should not accept any less oversight for customers here in this state. This legislation will provide that oversight, and there is no legitimate reason for the government or anyone else in this Dáil to reject or oppose the legislation unless they're doing the bidding of the industry. And let me make this appeal to the Minister, because the Minister knows this is right, that this legislation is right, so they're not going to vote against it. But they're going to amend it to make it that it won't have passed on to the next stage, which is pre-legislative scrutiny, for 9 months. Now, why and under God would you do that? All we are trying to do here is make the insurance companies live up to their promise to reduce premiums to the customers and to make sure the same oversight that is in these companies when they sell a policy in Newry, in Belfast or in Derry this year is applying here. Please drop your amendment, let this go to pre-legislative scrutiny, and I will give you a commitment that I will work with you and your department to make sure that this legislation is robust, is fit for purpose, and if needed to be, is amended at committee stage after we have proper legislative scrutiny. Thank you.
Deputy Conway-Walsh.
And I want to commend my colleague and Finance spokesperson Pearse Doherty for bringing forward this bill, and he has provided an opportunity to all Oireachtas members from all parties and none to demonstrate to those who have been crucified by high insurance costs that they too are prepared to stand for fairness. Insurance companies have for years hidden behind the Book of Quantum. They've continuously and consistently used the high cost of personal injury claims as a cover for charging eye-watering premiums for compulsory insurance. And since the 24th of April, with the personal injury guidelines, since they took effect, they no longer have this defence. Yet we know from experience that every possible tactic is used by the insurance industry to keep the raw data hidden from those who ask why Irish policyholders are forced to pay such extortionate premiums. Indeed, we know that the EU Commission was sufficiently concerned about price fixing and cartel-like behaviours of motor insurance providers that they conducted unannounced inspections. The Competition and Consumer Authority Protection Commission also conducted its own investigations and found a lack of data on the market was serving as a barrier to new entrants. Price gouging and the rip-off of people who are legally required to purchase insurance has to be stopped. It's not enough to just stabilise the situation as it is. There must be a real reversal of the crippling cost of insurance, and that's why this bill is so important. Put simply, it will require the insurance providers to provide the relevant data to the central bank so that the savings from the implementation of the new guidelines can be passed on to the policyholder. The substantial reduction of insurance costs has to be the end game. Otherwise, it's all just a paper exercise to increase the profits of the insurance industry. We must stop dancing to the tunes of the insurance industry and tackle the exploitation of those who can least afford to hand over their hard-earned money because they're left with no other option. Reductions in the cost of insurance claims must be passed on, and this bill will guarantee the outcome that we need. This legislation will apply pressure on the industry to pass on euro for euro all the savings that they make to their customers. We know that the new guidelines reduce the level of personal injury awards between 31 and 69%. Similar regulations, as was said, came into effect in Britain following a reduction in the level of whiplash injury awards, where many of the same insurers are operating here. Motorists, businesses and homeowners need us to make a stand for them. We need to make it now.
Ebony Tully.
Commitments made by the insurance industry that a reduction in insurance awards would see a reduction in insurance costs for the consumer are not being met. And in fact, many motorists and homeowners and business people are seeing their insurance premiums increase. When members of the insurance industry appeared before the Joint Committee on Finance, Public Expenditure and Reform, the call for the personal injury guidelines was made with the commitment that a reduction in the level of claims would result in a reduction of the level of premiums. And with this in mind, the Oireachtas passed legislation and the personal injuries guidelines took legal effect on the 24th of April, replacing the Book of Quantum in determining the level of awards in personal injury cases. And the judiciary has subsequently reduced the awards in respect of these guidelines substantially. But on the day the new guidelines come into force, the Director of the Alliance for Insurance Reform is quoted in the Irish Times as saying that they expected that insurance premium charges would or should be significantly reduced from the following Monday. However, since the personal injuries guidelines were adopted, the insurance industry has put the brakes on many of the commitments it made in terms of reducing insurance premiums. We are not seeing much evidence that the insurance industry is actually passing on these savings. Premiums have not been reduced for motorists, homeowners and business people in line with the reduction in awards. It seems that the insurance companies have simply pocketed the bulk of these reductions despite the commitments they gave. The guidelines, since they have come into effect, have seen a dramatic reduction in insurance awards, in some cases reducing the level of awards by over 50%. So we need a way to verify that these reductions in awards are passed on to consumers in the form of lower insurance prices. And the legislation before us today, introduced by my colleague Pearse Doherty, will ensure that happens, and it will provide much needed transparency with regards to this issue. And it will provide the Department of Finance with the ability to make regulations that will require insurance companies to provide information to the Central Bank on how the new personal injury guidelines have impacted on premiums for policyholders. It would force the insurance industry to pass the savings they make on to their customers. Similar regulations came into effect in Britain, where many insurers in this market also operate. Insurance companies here in Ireland should be subject to no less scrutiny. Consumers cannot afford to wait any longer, and the government cannot just sit back and hope the insurance company will do the right thing and reduce premiums. The insurance company needs to be held to account, and this legislation will allow this to happen.
Minister, when you talk to people about the insurance industry and the way it has conducted itself in recent years, people say lots of things, but one thing that regularly comes up with me, that they're a law unto themselves, that they're beyond reach, that they're beyond reproach, that they're beyond sanction, and that they're unaccountable. And who pays the price for that? Businesses struggling to find any kind of affordable insurance at a time when business is under severe pressure. Childcare facilities barely able to find insurance, many of them going out of business. Businesses in very specific areas, such as soft play areas. Young people trying to get on the road who might need a car to get any kind of job or to be able to get to university and to be able to spread their wings. They're all being denied that by what the insurance industry is doing. And Minister, what this bill seeks to do is to make them accountable. They have made big commitments that if the costs come down, if damages come down, that they will pass it on to their customers. They've said in 2019 that if awards are reduced by 50%, they'd reduce motor premiums by 15%, a business insurance by 20%. So these guidelines have been in place for over a month now, but there's no evidence yet of a passing on to the consumer. The government's policy so far is to cross their fingers and hope the insurance industry will do the right thing and reduce premiums. That isn't good enough. The insurance industry needs to be held to account to deliver on its promise. Businesses in Cork and my constituency and everywhere are under very severe financial pressure because of the pandemic. The least they deserve is not to be ripped off by insurance firms taking advantage. This bill would force insurance companies to pass these savings on, euro for euro, to customers in the form of lower premiums. It would require the insurance industry to pass on information to the central bank outlining if and how they've passed on those savings. It's a perfectly sensible piece of legislation. And Minister, I have to say, I don't understand why you're delaying this. For 9 months, it's a fiction. It is a way of avoiding supporting a perfectly good Sinn Féin piece of legislation that would help motorists, that would help businesses, that would help community organisations. And you should drop your amendment.
Deputy Denise Mitchell.
I welcome the opportunity to speak on this bill. It will benefit so many people, and I want to thank my colleague Deputy Pearse Doherty for bringing it to the floor. The culture of insurance companies ripping off its customers is an issue we're all very familiar with. This bill hopes to change that culture and pass on the savings to customers because it is the right thing to do. Insurance companies were using rising claims to justify price hikes over the last number of years. But not passing the savings on to customers is unfair and unjust. It's the insurance industry moving the goalposts to protect their profits. It's a sector that's speaking out of both sides of its mouth, and its only motivation seems to be crazy profits off the back of people who can't afford to be paying what they are paying. Today's bill seeks to make things better for drivers, businesses and homeowners who are being ripped off. Minister, young people are being priced off the road. Childcare facilities are getting quoted out of existence or being refused insurance completely. The average working person is getting robbed by these companies, and this bill, in some way, will change that. It's about fairness and protecting the consumer. It's time the industry is held to account and that it's transparent with the people. Minister, you have to act here. Kicking the can down the road isn't in the interest of anybody except insurance companies.
Brian Stanley.
Thanks, Cora, and I welcome the opportunity to speak on this. For too long, the insurance companies have ripped off the public. The insurance sector made profits of 142 million last year, yet premium prices kept increasing. The Sinn Féin legislation would force insurance companies to pass on savings to their customers and reduce premium prices as a result of new personal injury guidelines. A recent survey by Sinn Féin found that 58% of respondents have seen their premiums increase. This is despite the new guidelines. Our legislation forces the industry to outline to the central bank how they have passed on the savings to the public. Similar legislation, Minister, has been enacted in Britain and governs the practices of companies like AIG, AXA, Aviva, Allianz and RSA in Britain, all of whom operate here in this country. And dual pricing is another issue that Deputy Doherty has done a lot of work on. The practice was banned by the British Financial Conduct Authority last Friday, yet continues here in Ireland. The British ruling affects both home and motor insurance. Dual pricing involves the overcharging of loyal customers on renewal premiums and can drive up prices in the region of 35%. The Central Bank has recently investigated this practice here in Ireland, thanks to complaints submitted by Deputy Doherty and Sinn Féin, and it found that the practice was widespread and meant that, quote, those customers with the longest tenure paid the most, unquote. We need to see action on both of these fronts. We need action now to outlaw these practices. Minister, the ball is firmly in the government's court, and thoughts of delaying this is absolutely outrageous. There's been too much delay, and there should be no more delays. It's time to act, Minister.
Deputy Claire Curran is sharing with her colleagues, Deputies Clark, Mythen and Donnelly. Deputy Clare Curran, please.
Gurmahagat, Ken Corla, and I very much welcome the opportunity to speak on this really important piece of legislation here this evening. And I've listened to the Minister in his contribution, but unfortunately, despite, as he puts it, holding the insurance companies to account, there has been nothing done by this government that has reduced premiums up to this very point in time, because the whole problem is premiums are still increasing, and that is the problem. And I think it's a great shame that we have to constantly push and force the insurance companies in this state to actually do the right thing when it comes to costs for customers. And what's worse then is that the government failed to act on behalf of those very customers, people the length and breadth of this state. And I'd ask the question, why haven't the government stepped in to ensure that the savings made by insurance companies through the reduction of up to 50% in awards are not passed on to customers? And why haven't the government done this? And that is the very reason why we have had to step in, and Pearse Doherty has had to step in with this piece of legislation. For years and years, insurance companies have been ripping customers off with rising premiums, making it harder and harder for young people to actually get on the road, and most especially in rural areas. I know last year on turning 18, my own brother received quotes of over €3,000, and that's on top of tax of €700–800 and on top of ongoing costs to run a car. It is absolutely impossible, unless you have money, to actually get on the road, and particularly in rural areas where we have no public transport. It's either non-existent or it's inconvenient. And insurance companies have been lining their pockets, and they'll do so even more now, in that they're saving money on awards, yet they're increasing premiums at the same time for no other reason than they can. And this legislation brought forward here this evening will actually put a halt to that. And I've heard what the Minister has said in relation to this just being one element, but at least it will be one element that would actually reduce the premiums, which is not happening, and that's the problem. This bill will ensure that savings to insurance companies are passed on to customers, and it'll give young people a chance to get on the road, to allow them to get from A to B, whether it's to a job or to college. And it'll actually help workers and families who are seeing increased costs all of the time, whether it's in rent, in childcare fees, in household bills. It will give them a break and an actual little bit of fairness when it comes to the cost of living in this state. Gurmahagat, Ceann Comhairle.
Sorcha Clark.
Gurmahagat, Ceann Comhairle. Looking at the government's proposal to read this again in 9 months, I can't quite decide if the government is going for kick the can champion or is planning on passing off Deputy Doherty's homework as their own in the future. Minister, you believe that an industry whose practices have been exposed time and time again by my colleague Deputy Doherty, an industry that was found to reward loyal customers by price gouging at time of renewal. Yet you believe they will voluntarily disclose the savings being made and actually pass them on. Minister, nobody is that naive. The behaviour and the practices of the insurance industry make the introduction of legislation now absolutely necessary. The time for good faith has passed. This legislation will hold the insurance industry to account, requiring it to demonstrate if and how they have passed on savings to customers. A requirement based on the same companies in the UK where they are more than happy to comply. I have countless constituents and businesses who rely entirely on insurance to earn a living. And thanks to the decades-long failed policies or non-existent public transport now in Longford Westmeath means it is essential if you need to get to work or to colleges to simply need a car. Businesses are being priced out of existence. Come to Kilbeggan, Minister, I'll introduce you to businesses that are no longer operating because of the cost of insurance. Now, the dogs on the street know that they're being taken advantage of. And as one constituent put it to me, this was all happening while the government done less than nothing. Don't insult people's intelligence and expect them to believe that an industry that has taken advantage of them time and time again, year in and year out, is going to simply step up and do the right thing. Now, I don't believe you think that yourself, Minister, so don't try and sell it here. Don't try and sell it in this House, and don't try to sell it to the hard-working people who are being priced out of existence because of insurance premium.
Deputy Meisen.
Ceann Comhairle. I would like to thank Pearse Doherty for bringing this bill forward.
It is a culmination of intense research based on the principles of transparency, fairness and accountability. At the heart of this bill is the protection of working people and their families. Any owner of a vehicle will tell you their premiums over the last few years have increased year in, year out, especially young drivers who have been subject to extortionate quotes, often these quotes exceeding the value of the vehicle itself. This bill gives this House the chance to correct and rein in this practice of gross profiteering and legally requires the insurance industry to supply information to the central bank and categorically show how claims have been reduced as a result of the new personal injury guidelines. And more importantly, how these savings will reflect on those premiums over the next 4 years and how it will be directly passed on to the customer. We all know, as sure as night follows day, that if insurance companies are left to their own self-regulation, the full savings created by the new injury guidelines will not be passed on to the customers, or the full empirical numbers for claims will not be made public. In fact, the Central Bank in 2020 found that the average insurance premium increased by 35% in the last decade, and that 2.5 million policyholders were overcharged by 187 million in a single year. Therefore, this Judicial Council Amendment Bill is so important, because this bill legally requires the insurance industry to provide information to the Central Bank on the reduction of claims due to the new injury guidelines. It also states that the Central Bank is legally bound to pass on that information to the Minister of Finance, specifically stating that a report be brought before the Irish Parliament on an annual basis. This part is crucial, as it will deliver a more robust, measurable, transparent and accountable insurance industry that will benefit motorists, businesses and homeowners alike. The bill should be supported from across all sides of this House, because it gives homeowners, businesses and motorists a fair deal for their hard-earned cash, and will prevent any further gouging or dual pricing that will continue if we rely on the insurance industry to self-regulate itself. Again, I thank my colleague Pearse Doherty for his extensive work on this bill. It is a pity that the government again capitulates to the insurance industry and concedes to the latest this good legislation for another 9 months in their latest amendment.
Thank you, Deputy Donnelly.
Minister, the citizens of Ireland must be living in a different place to this government, and most definitely the young people of Ireland must be living in a different place, because what you explained in your statement to us bears no resemblance to what's happening on the ground. We have to end the insurance rip-off and reduce premiums for consumers. The personal injuries guidelines, which have been in place for over a month, have significantly reduced the cost of claims for insurance companies. However, the insurance companies are clearly not keeping their promise to reduce the costs of insurance. As stated earlier on, the survey launched by Sinn Féin's spokesperson Pearse Doherty found that 58% of respondents who received their renewal since the new guidelines came into effect actually saw their premiums increase, and only 22% saw them fall. The insurance industry promised to reduce premiums for motorists and businesses significantly as a result of these guidelines. It's disgraceful that on the evidence so far, these savings are not being passed on to their customers, and this must happen. These insurance companies will do what you inspect, not what you expect. The days of wanting insurance companies to do the right thing are over. Deputy Doherty's Judicial Council bill would require the insurance industry to provide information to the central bank for each of the next 4 years, outlining how the cost of claims have fallen as a result of the new personal injuries guidelines, and if and how they have passed these savings on to their consumers in the form of reduced prices. The legislation requires the central bank to report this information to the Minister for Finance, with a report brought before each House of the Oireachtas annually. The insurance industry must be held to account, and we must ensure that every cent that should be passed on is passed on to the young people who are being forced to pay thousands every year in insurance. They are the people who are being ripped off. The businesses are the people who are being ripped off. The insurance companies are the ones who are making mega profits, and that has to end. It's important, again, that was noted as well earlier on, that similar regulations are already in effect in Britain. So they're not unique and they're not unknown to the industry, and I commend this bill.
Sharing time.
Yeah. So myself, August Chapter Quinlivan, August Chapter Doherty. It's okay. It's okay. So thank you very much, Count Corla. I want to first thank Dr. Pearse Doherty for all of the work that he has done, not just with this piece of important legislation, but on the area of insurance, and he has been rightly recognised in the chamber here this evening by those who care to pay attention to exactly what is happening. I listened with interest to the Minister, and I often think when ministers come in here and they read out a script, and sometimes it really sounds to the listener like they're reading it out for the first time. And I think to myself, I wonder, do they believe all of the stuff that's in that? I mean, to come in here and to say a single piece of legislation won't hold the industry to account, of course it won't. But doing nothing definitely won't hold the industry to account. And I'm fascinated to hear about the multi-pronged approach as outlined by the Junior Minister just now, because it doesn't seem to be having an impact. So instead of reading from scripts, what we have done and what Dr. Doherty has done is go and actually speak to people, and they will tell you, because 58% of the people who responded to the survey will say that their premiums have in fact gone up. So when people say the proof of the pudding is in the eating of the pudding shows that the premiums are going up. And it's not good enough to simply say, let's wait, or let's add another prong to the multi-pronged approach, or let's try putting a different name on it. In actual fact, what people need, what they want, is action. So I'm talking about people in my own constituency, in tourism-dependent industries, in experience-type industries. Those people cannot afford to insure their businesses. I'm talking about young people who, because of poor transport infrastructure, have absolutely no choice but to have a car under them in order to be able to get on the road. Those people don't want to wait, and they shouldn't have to wait 9 months for another prong to be added maybe, or more deliberations, or whatever it is that you're doing, because it's not working. So what people want is they want action. They want concrete action that will actually achieve results. So, you know, when you're talking to businesses, and I am, and they're wary and they're fearful about opening up, about reopening now, the last thing they need to see is their insurance premiums going up. So I would urge you to think about the people who are impacted, to withdraw your nonsensical amendment, to work with Dr. Doherty, who has the support of people in the House, who has the credibility and who has the track record, and actually start to deliver for people who need to see their premiums come down.
Dr. Quinlivan.
Can I start off by thanking my colleague, Deputy Pearse Doherty, for bringing forward an amendment to the Judicial Council Bill. The work he's done in tackling the artificial high premiums has been tremendous, and I think this amendment, if accepted, will have a real positive impact on insurance customers across the state. I was disappointed to hear the response from both ministers who came in and spoke on the issue. And, you know, when I lived in America, there was a phrase, mañana, mañana, meant tomorrow, we'll do nothing, basically. And your 9 months indicates to me that that's what you've done in previous stalls, and here you are again, kicking the can down the road. We accept that in life we require insurance for a myriad of different reasons. We accept that there will be an associated cost with that. We presume this cost will be fair. But what is not acceptable is artificial high premiums and the failure to pass on savings and damages awards to loyal customers. On the 24th of April this year, the personal injuries guideline came into effect. The guidelines have reduced the cost of damages award by insurance companies. These guidelines reduce the cost of payouts for personal injury claims by between 31 and 69%. In the month or so since these guidelines came into effect, the premiums paid by consumers remained high. Over this period, less than a quarter of consumers have seen their premium reduce. It's worth reminding ourselves that at the Finance Committee in 2019, the insurance companies committed to reducing premiums if damages for personal injuries were reduced. They have not done this. It was suggested if damages reduced by 50%, motor insurance and business insurance would fall by on average of 15 to 20% respectively. This also has not happened. The promise to reduce premiums has yet to come to pass. We cannot rely on insurance companies to pass these savings onto their customers without pressure. If they wanted to, they would have done so already by reducing premiums. So we must take steps to make sure these savings are passed on to people. Do we sit back and hope that insurance companies act in the interest of consumers, as this has been the approach of successive governments with little reward? Instead, Sinn Féin are inducing this amendment. The introduction of this amendment will ultimately benefit motorists, homeowners and business owners. It will create the conditions in which fair pricing can be provided to insurance customers who for too long have been overcharged for the premiums. Our nearest neighbours in Britain have similar regulations in place. Many of the same insurance companies operate in both jurisdictions. And if we were interested, we could solve out this issue if we want to. Thank you.
First of all, can I begin by thanking all the deputies who spoke in tonight's debate on this legislation, and all of those who echoed kind words in relation to myself and my party's campaign in relation to insurance costs. It was mentioned earlier on about, the government trying to steal my homework. I don't give a damn which minister takes any of the work that I have done and runs with it. You can have it all. You can have this legislation. You can have the dual pricing legislation. Go and do it. Run with it. But do not delay it. And really, I was taken back by Minister Smith's contribution, which was mind-blowing, because it was basically a kind of thing, you're not as great as you think you are. I don't care. I have only one agenda, and that is to drive down insurance costs. That is all what this is about. You say that this legislation will do nothing. You say after tonight's debate you still don't understand what is required. Let me spell it out to you, Minister. After a very embarrassing contribution in the House, this legislation is based on what these existing companies in Ireland, AXA, AIG, Aviva, Allianz, Zurich and RSA, have to do in the North, have to do in Britain. What it is in Britain they gave a commitment if awards were reduced, they would pass on pound for pound to the customers. Here in this state, they gave the Finance Committee the same assurances back in 2019. There is absolutely no way we can ever know if that commitment has been delivered upon. Why? Because the National Claims Information Database, yes, collects a lot of information for insurance companies, but a crucial piece of information that they do not and don't have the power to collect is what would be the premiums if these new guidelines didn't come into effect. What would be the level of awards that the industry would be paying out if these new guidelines didn't come into effect? That is what these insurance companies have to do, audited by an independent auditor and provide to the central bank in Britain. That is what this legislation demands of them to do. That means you hold them to account. You can find out whether they are delivering on their promise. Because we may see some companies reduce premiums by 8%, maybe 12%, maybe 14%, but there is nobody in this House that will ever have an idea whether that was actually passing on the full amount of the reduction in awards that was enabled through the passing of the Judicial Council Bill. So if you don't understand it, maybe you understand it now. Right? Because this is a serious piece of legislation. A piece of legislation that thankfully the Alliance for Insurance Reform are backing, and I want to welcome all of the work that they have done, working with all parties across this House in relation to reforming and driving down the cost of insurance. This isn't a gimmick. This is about making sure that prices that should have been reduced for every single motorist that didn't have a claim or that didn't change their policy, they should have seen a reduction after the implementation of these guidelines on the 24th of April. You see the survey that we carried out is out of kilter. I was talking to a deputy just up in the room earlier on. He was mentioning, he goes, pity I didn't have a speaking time. I just got my insurance renewal. It's gone up €100. This is what's happening in the real world. And we are letting the industry off the hook. The Minister then talked about, from Fianna Fáil talked about, that this is one element and that it would be naive to think that it's, that this is a golden, bullet or that this was going to fix everything. I've never said that. He then goes on to list reports, and we need to wait for reports. One of the reports was on the dual pricing. As a result of a super claim that I made in 2019 to the central bank that actually instigated that report. 2 reports we've already got, the final in July. Then he talked about the coming into effect of the Consumer Insurance Contracts Bill, where people will be able to see what their claims and premiums were over the last 5 years. Again, legislation that I drafted, specifically that section, and brought into effect in 2019. But your government, these 2 ministers over here, are delaying its implementation since 2019 until September this year. He then goes on to talk about the National Claims Information Database will have public liability information. Hugely welcome, which I argued in 2019 when the legislation was being passed that we shouldn't be delaying that. And then he says we'll have crucial information when the National Claims Information Database publish more information on motor insurance, which will actually not take into effect the timelines here. So as I said, Minister, I don't care whose name is on the legislation. What I do care is that insurance companies need to be held to account, and it was an embarrassing contribution that was given by both ministers today that could have been written by any one of the big giants of the insurance industry. Giants who have rejected just last week the findings of the Competition and Consumer Authority here that they are operating their cartel. Minister, I would finish on this, Liaskin Corley. The fact is there is negatives here that you are delaying it for 9 months. The positives is that this will pass second stage, and this tonight will send out a signal to the industry that they have nowhere to hide. I do note Minister Fleming's comments that he's looking at his own legislation and he may take the spirit of this legislation on board. Minister, I implore you, as I said, I don't care who's doing it, whose name's with it. Let's do this. Let's hold them to account. Let's make sure they pass on euro for euro the premium reductions that they promised 2 years ago. Thank you.
Now that concludes the debate, and there's an amendment in the name of the Minister. So the question is he on cash now that the amendment be made? Go nain Topher and Lassu. The Chakti Atar Hivna Cash the Abrigito. Chakti Tony Gwynna Abrigay Neil.
Yeah.
So will an Kesh Richa. The question is carried. Votal. Vote has been called. The division is deferred until the weekly division time tomorrow night.